Thank you, Roberta, for that really nice introduction, and really nice to meet all of you, some familiar faces. So happy to see you all. Um, and my plan for tonight is really to um, share a little bit of why I got into this topic of doing philosophy with teachers, how that's inspired my work, how that's inspired really my entire dissertation research, and I would love to share some of the um, well, in dissertation speak, some parts of my findings chapter, but really like how it's impacted the teachers that I worked with, and what is the potential for doing philosophy with teachers at all, just as a general question. And so I'll start with my motivation really to do this work. I started doing philosophy with children in 2014, and very quickly I realized that in the classrooms that I was in, the teachers were really interested in the work and they wanted more of it. But I would notice that they wouldn't necessarily participate in the circle. That was sort of me and the students. And in part, that was because they didn't feel confident about doing philosophy with the students because they felt like they needed a philosophical background. But I also suspected in part it was because they hadn't done philosophy themselves to really like feel the magic, so to speak. And so I was really interested in seeing, well, what would happen if teachers did philosophy? I knew that it would be good. I just didn't understand how. And I think I recognized that in order for and as for people who've done our training programs, you'll know that you really understand how transformative it can be once you participate. Reading about it is very different from doing it. And so over the course of 1 year, I observed a group of 5 elementary school teachers, all in the 5th grade, in one particular school, doing philosophy sessions once a month throughout the school year, right? So we had about 8 sessions throughout the school year. And the students of these teachers also had philosophy in their classrooms, but the teachers were not facilitating philosophy. We had facilitators from the University of Washington come in and do philosophy with the students. But these teachers were really interested in what was happening in their students' philosophy sessions. And when we pitched the idea saying, hey, would you like to do some philosophy too, with like the um, expectation that it would help you kind of facilitate conversations that might emerge from their philosophy sessions, they said, yeah, great. And at the time, we didn't know what was going to happen 1 year from then. And so I started recording what was happening over that year. So as we did this, we tried to match some of the topics that the students were going to be talking about with the teachers. So if we were reading a book, the teachers would read that book also in their PLC session. If we were discussing a particular idea using an activity or a prompt, we try and bring the same one to the PLC. And immediately, a lot of teachers went back saying, well, now I kind of have a sense of what kind of questions to ask my students to push them further. But there were several other things that emerged from the research that I did that I'd really like to share with all of you. I was hoping that I wouldn't do slides because I don't get to see you all, but I have some really rich quotes from my teachers that I wanted to share. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll come back to this main room. Okay, I'm not going to do the presentation thing because that really confuses me. So you're just going to see my work in progress presentation this way. So a few things happened in the philosophy PLCs. And for those of you who are not familiar with PLCs, in the United States, it stands for Professional Learning Community, and it's a gathering of educators learning about something. So in the philosophy PLC, we had several teachers saying that it was really great because it helped us clarify the meaning of certain words and ideas and concepts that we just use and throw around all the time, but don't really deeply think about. So one of the teachers said, there's an element within the philosophy PD or PLC that got me thinking about how I approach certain topics or how I present information. I think it's part of being a teacher, but I think philosophy further got me reflecting about the meaning of different words or topics that we don't really commonly think about or question, like happiness or something political in the like what makes something political. I guess I never really thought about that very deeply. We're just like, it is what it is. So in the PLC, they kind of like, broke apart some of these words and were like, well, what does that really mean? And what does it mean for you versus what does it mean for me versus what does it mean for my students? Are we all on the same page here? Can I use a word and be completely sure that everyone's thinking about it in the same way? So that was something that came out of the PLC. Another really cool thing was that the teachers started asking more questions in their teaching and in their classrooms. So one of the teachers said, I like the idea of doing philosophy and practicing being a philosopher because I think it changes the way I ask questions to my students. I remember we were having a philosophy and social studies talk about dress codes. I was like, why can't a woman show her stomach? And it was this really rich conversation. It was really cool. We were able to do that a lot in social studies. I would ask those types of questions to the kids. Why are farms important? Why do you think they're writing about farms? Why do I care if the elephant's going extinct? Why do we need an environment? They had some really cool conversations, and the PLT reminded me to steer the conversations. So it was great because the teachers wanted to encourage more open-ended philosophical discussions in their other subjects, which they were not doing so much of before the PLC year. This example I love because one of the several teachers said that it helped them reflect on themselves and their personal values and how they show up in the classroom. This one particular teacher brought up a great example of how it made him reflect on his gender biases. So he goes on to say, I reflected on how I approach girls in my classroom. My wife pointed out that even when you talk about students, you just talk about the boys. And I thought, what? The girls in my class speak up and have a voice. But I do feel like some of the boys' behavior tends to be a bit louder, a bit more noticeable. It's no excuse, but I thought, well, that might be true. Maybe I don't really interact with the girls in the same way or as much. A parent pointed out the tables that I had were all male baseball players. Why not female scientists? At first, I was like, are you kidding me? I was so excited about having these tables. But it got me thinking, how am I presenting? Am I talking about history? Am I finding opportunities in science to share about female scientists? And am I calling on girls as much as I call on boys? During science or math, when a girl raises her hand, I want to encourage that. I want them to continue to enjoy math, enjoy science. I don't want to kill that for them. I want them to be heard and have other people hear their ideas. And how I present the room as well. What sorts of books do I have? And at the end of that year, that teacher came up to me and said, I've always considered myself to not have gender biases and to be really open to all my students. But the PLC made me realize, wow, I got a blind spot there, and it's helped to reflect on it. And so those are, I mean, I could talk for a really long time about this topic because I love it so much, but I will move on to, what it did for the teachers themselves and the relationships that they have with each other, because one set of impacts is on their teaching and their practice and their thinking about their practice, and the next set is, well, what does it do for them relationally, and is that even important? And so what the teachers gained from this, firstly, is to think more about working with each other in a democratic and collaborative way. Not that they weren't doing that before, but I think that brought that more front and center for them. And here's an example somebody brought up in one of my interviews with them. And she says, we have to be able to work together occasionally. Even though we're really isolated, I have to be able to sit and listen to what Kristen says, name changed, process it, and then think about whether or not I want to do that. We have to be able to exchange ideas. The PLC felt really democratic in that way. We were all sharing. Everyone was involved. I feel like in other professional developments, there's usually an expert, So we're all just trying to absorb what they're trying to say and learn how to do something. But when we're having these types of conversations, it's like nobody's really the expert, and it's kind of cool. The next set of this to me is like really special because um, every single teacher said that this was probably the biggest value they took away from the PLC relationally, and they said they got to know their colleagues as people. So one of them goes on to say, what I appreciated was the opportunity to talk with my colleagues about who they are, sharing the personal side of us. We tend to be so task-oriented, and when we have our meetings, because we're trying to get material ready to go or whatever. So I appreciated the opportunity to hear everybody's perspectives on happiness or fulfillment or purpose. That's really valuable. I gained a greater understanding of my colleagues and where they're coming from. It helped me to see them more as a person rather than just a colleague. Even though I work every single day with this team, it's mainly around things related to kids, not related to each other. I think it helped us understand the complexity of where people are coming from. It helped us be more compassionate, helped us enjoy one another more. So I love that. I know I'm running out of time, but I'd love to share the last few slides with you. So I'm going to run through it really quick. One of the teachers, the same one who talked about gender biases, he reflected a lot on his life outside of teaching, along with a couple others, but he in particular said, many times the questions that we explored, I would end up talking to my wife about it or posing some question to her and having a discussion about it. Perhaps one of the purposes of the PLC became my own personal reflection on either teaching or just my own life in general. The topics that we discussed opened up things that I could talk to my wife or other people about. Trying to understand why things happen or why a person would act the way they did or say what they said. The PLC encouraged that. One of the teachers said it helped them practice listening, and I think that's a really amazing thing and such an important skill. And she says, I feel like I listened a bit more, listening to my colleagues and processing what they said. It was hard for me to do. I feel like that part was really helpful for me with working with my colleagues because I actually practiced listening to them. Sometimes we move really fast and don't get the time to really hear each other. So I'm already a better teacher. We really have to hear and process, and it's actually really cool to be listened to. The facilitator pointed out that I was contradicting myself when I said something, and I was like, oh my God, you're actually thinking about what I said. So cool. And when I asked them at the end, what was their wish for future PLCs, or what do they wish that they spoke more about? They said, so we had one entire session on what it means to be a good teacher. And they loved that. They said that they would do an entire PLC session year round just on the topic of what it means to be a good teacher. Because they said there were such few spaces to really think deeply about philosophically what it means to show up as a teacher and the relationship between teaching and learning. And so one of the teachers said, I wish we could have done more on what is teaching because I think about it all the time. I think about what is teaching and what is learning. Am I still a teacher if the students are not learning? So I think about that probably all the time. I haven't really felt like a teacher until maybe this year. I'd never felt like I was really advancing them very much. And then this year I would teach them something and then I would see them trying it. And I was like, okay, I'm doing something this year that's different. I'd like to end by saying that this sort of PLC of doing like a free, sort of unstructured form of philosophical inquiry with teachers bridged the gap between this sort of top-down, expert-led professional developments, which of course serve their own purpose, but is a very structured format. And then there's this aspiration of bridge of like teacher professional development meeting personal development and personal growth. And this sort of PLC kind of helped bridge that gap. So another quote saying, personal growth is really important, especially for this job, because it's part of the practice. Reflecting on myself as a teacher, I think you're also a learner. And so whether I need to work on something or myself or my profession, I think they both go hand in hand. I was telling the kids that if I see somebody doing something really cool, I want to know how they do it so I can be better too. I'm like, okay, well, how can I do that? What does that look like for me? And I think that's really important for teaching as well. So the need for more philosophy with teachers. I think there's a great need, and this teacher puts it perfectly for me right at the end. And she says, regular professional development focuses on all things related to professional practice. There's never been professional development that I can recall anyway that is focused on who we are as people. And I think there should be more of it. And I will stop sharing my